the room, so that'll be fine. I'm John Ingen. I work for the city. It's nice to see you all again, especially on a beautiful spring evening. Thank you for taking the time to join us as we continue our visioning process for West Broadway, our Charrette. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening you will see a draft to consider and talk about some more. Those good folks from MIG are presenting that this evening. We look forward to hearing your comments. I look forward to seeing the presentation because it's brand new to me tonight as well. So thank you again for attending. It's good to see you all. We'll forge ahead. With that, Ryan, it's all yours.
Thank you. Also glad to see the turnout tonight and a lot of familiar faces. As the mayor said, our purpose tonight is to present you a draft vision for West Broadway based on the feedback that you've given us at the 4 previous community meetings, as well as the survey that we did of area residents and businesses. We have a presentation that will be partly familiar to those of you that have been coming to the other meetings, and partly fairly new, and we have probably much more clear graphics than we had last time when we'd been working all through that day to create them. So our agenda will be to run through an overview of the process and the draft vision, and then we'll spend some time taking your questions, hearing your feedback and discussion as a large group, and then we will give you time to come look more closely at some of the graphics that are on the wall, and we'll stand there and answer questions or hear your comments. We've got ways for you to write down your comments as well as give them to us verbally during the meeting. So welcome, and I'm going to jump right into it. Everybody hear me okay? Yes. Nobody moved. It must. Nobody can hear me at all. Anyway, I just gave you a quick overview of the agenda, the presentation, group discussion, and then an open house where we have on the walls, we have some photo simulations of how West Broadway might look in the future. We have some detailed diagrams of how some of the key intersections might work. We have some typical cross sections of how the roadway might work. An implementation timeline is that colorful chart in the middle of the wall over there, and the overall concept plan back in the corner. So those might be things you want to look at in more detail, because while they're in this presentation, they won't be on the screen all that long. I've shown you this diagram at every one of the meetings. We've been working through a process of research and analysis, alternative scenarios, preferred scenario, and we're just moving over toward the end of the process where we're at the draft plan. We'll be back in about a month for a final presentation based on your feedback tonight. In the first phase, we did site analysis, existing conditions, a survey of the corridor. In the second phase, many of you were here for our corridor design Charrette, where we had kind of an interactive dialogue with all of you about various alternatives and then produced a preferred concept from that. What we're doing right now is working on basically polishing that up and refining it, and here we are at the draft plan and implementation strategies tonight. Just by quick review, we've taken several things as givens to the process. We figured public safety was a top priority, and there wasn't any debate whether we were going to work on traffic safety, emergency vehicle safety, and lighting for the street. We also took it as a given that West Broadway would be a multimodal corridor with motor, transit, bike, and pedestrian circulation working efficiently. We've talked about some of the constraints. The corridor is disconnected from the river. The zoning isn't necessarily appropriate to some of the visions. The existing development pattern favors automobile circulation. It's not a great place to be a pedestrian. Controversy about the road diet and the lane changes. State transportation standards, funding are all issues for the corridor. At the same time, it's in a beautiful place. It has the advantages of connection to, or proximity to the river if it's not so connected, and proximity to your outstanding downtown. We can link the corridor more to the river. We can make it more pedestrian friendly, improve emergency vehicle access, create a greater sense of place, We have a high degree of public interest. We've had such great turnout at these meetings. You have opportunities for redevelopment and property upgrades, public-private partnerships, links to the parks and loop trails, economic opportunities. You have the advantage of a proximity to a successful downtown. We can extend some of the downtown business into the corridor, the proximity to the river, major market anchors in the hospital, and the expanding and new supermarket. It's a primary transportation route, so we have a lot of circulation. There's key intersections with major north-south routes. You have tax increment financing available to you to help fund things, and you have an opportunity to build a true mix of uses. We convened you in the fall to talk about your vision for the corridor and have you give us some ideas. We talked about some of the envisioned land uses, primarily commercial and mixed use along the corridor. We talked about environmental and pedestrian improvements that were possible and started identifying where some of those places could be. We talked about right-of-way improvements in key places where we needed to make safety improvements, and I think you'll see suggestions for those places in more detail when my colleague Jeff Key from Robert Petty Associates continues with the presentation. Realize I didn't introduce him or Jay Rankins or Bruce Appleyard from MIG. I should have done that at the beginning. I apologize. The guiding principles that came out of that vision workshop that we thought really became the driving force behind this plan was streetscape design, safety, connections and linkages, accessibility for all users, and development and land use became key themes as we moved into creating the draft scenarios. And we put together this vision statement for West Broadway with the primary vision being that the West Broadway corridor will be a safe, vibrant, and attractive multimodal transportation gateway to downtown Missoula, framed by and serving a dense mix of pedestrian-oriented residential and commercial development. All users will have access to a well-planned mix of destinations, including businesses, residences, the river, trails, and open space. It'll be a well-lit, landscaped West Broadway will give priority to those accessing local businesses and residences. That's all. So a vision for West Broadway and the concept that we developed. First, we identified 12 or 11 urban design principles that we thought should guide the design work that we did. Improve pedestrian comfort and safety. Encourage neighborhood-oriented uses. Orient commercial buildings and to pedestrians as well as to cars. Increase residential density and housing choices in the area. Strengthen the visual and physical connections to the river. Seek a wide range of uses to create a vibrant district. Streamline traffic flow and vehicular movements for efficient access to downtown and district businesses. Improve bicycle access to and through the district. Provide appropriate levels of parking for planned uses. Create an animated public realm that is the public space with public-oriented uses on the ground floor of buildings in the area. And finally, soften transitions between the neighborhoods and the densities in the central part of the district. With those guidelines in mind, we worked during the Charrette in January to identify 3 scenarios, one that extended downtown basically through the whole length of the corridor, a second one that focused on creating a neighborhood commercial village up near Russell, and a third one that created several distinct zones and nodes. Many of you were here when we presented those. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but we mapped each of those and talked about some of the various pros and cons of those. And then we asked you to give us some review and feedback. And those of you that were here will remember we asked you to score the various scenarios, and then we listened to your comments and recorded those comments. We spent a lot of time working as a consultant team and with the steering committee to try and listen to that feedback we got and come up with a preferred concept. And we think that vision really is focusing on the riverfront triangle as a downtown extension into the corridor, using public realm improvements to enhance the corridor, give a real focus to green space and the river, prioritize key intersections and create nodes of activity throughout the district, take advantage of market-driven property upgrades rather than try and do the whole thing in one fell swoop, and seek opportunities through public incentives to lead private investment. With that, we mapped out how that concept might look and went over that at some length in the last public meeting. And what we've been doing since then was trying to refine and get more detailed with that plan so that we could be more kind of certain of some of those issues. And so from here on, you've been looking at stuff that I've presented before until now. Now we're moving into pretty much new material. This is a more detailed and clear image of basically the concept diagram for the corridor. We start with the riverfront triangle plan that was in place before we started this project. We talked about the importance of extending downtown into the corridor, the St. Patrick's development area that we are right here, the Safeway development opportunity, a more of a neighborhood commercial village with several nodes as we move to the west, riverfront residential along the river in this area, and a multifamily residential area kind of buffering the commercial uses along West Broadway from the single-family neighborhoods to the north. We've identified some key nodes or centers along the district. One of the things that makes a community interesting is if everything isn't the same and there's kind of some focal points. So we see one at the Riverfront Triangle Mixed Use Center. The new Safeway becomes a node. The Village Center that we're proposing in the area of the Burton intersection, and perhaps another anchor retailer further to the west. We identified key public spaces, especially the tremendous opportunity there is for a riverfront greenway that's much more developed than the beginnings of it that you have now. And then we identified several sub-areas and centers that should be areas of focus as you move through implementation over the next 3, 5, 10, 20 years. The Riverfront Greenway, the Riverfront Triangle, the downtown extension, the neighborhood commercial village, riverfront residential, multifamily residential, and a landscaped gateway entry at the west. The Riverfront Greenway is clearly your most immediate and implementable and attractive opportunity. You've already got a bit of a start with some trails that are there. It was snowy that day we were out there taking that picture. And these are some examples of other places that have really taken advantage of riverfronts with greenway and access. This is a floating dock. This is a commercial area with a walkway that looks out over a river. And this is a simulation of one of the challenging details of it is there's a part of the corridor where West Broadway gets pretty close to the river. And probably the Riverfront Greenway is going to have to come up and be kind of along the same area as the sidewalk and have an extra wide sidewalk in that spot. So that's an illustration of how that might work. The Riverfront Triangle Plan, we strongly endorse the mix of uses with a performing arts center, hotel, other activities in that area. We think it's key that the Riverfront Greenway come through there and have some really great river-oriented public spaces and private spaces facing the river in the Riverfront Triangle. We also think it's very important that as much attention be given to the north side of West Broadway there as to the south. And by that we mean that the downtown extension, this blue crossroads here is Broadway and Orange, and we think it's very important the detail of how development happens to the west of Orange is critical, because if you're downtown and you're thinking, especially as a pedestrian or a cyclist, that you might go into the corridor, how it looks from right there is going to make a lot of difference, and how it kind of pulls you out. So the development right around where there needs to be every bit as good as the development downtown. So it's a real attractive place, and that intersection and the few blocks that comes down here by St. Pat's are really key to how that development happens. And then as you move further to the west, we see a kind of neighborhood commercial village zone with several kind of key intersections and some commercial development. It might have a character. Here's an example of a similar kind of street at the scale you might try to achieve during that area. Then the riverfront residential would be further to the west and facing along where the island is there in the river. You already have a great example with the Clark Fork Commons that is exactly what we're talking about. That kind of development probably for at a variety of income levels and housing sizes and things, but facing the river. Here's another example in another city of some more upscale housing facing a river. We think that kind of stuff would be very attractive in Missoula. As we get further to the north, we'd see more multifamily residential at a scale that kind of steps down toward the single-family residential further to the north. And finally, we think the area that is west of Russell is probably not an area that is going to feel like a downtown or a mixed-use center too much. We think there's an opportunity to make it a much more attractive gateway with some planting. So there's some beautiful trees there now, and we think there should be more of those to help make it feel more like you're arriving in the city as you come through that area. So those are the sort of general areas where we think development should be a priority. We got some feedback that people were having trouble envisioning how it would be different. So we've spent some time, especially Jay spent some real time, working on trying to do a couple of photo simulations of how the street might change over the years. And we focused on three areas: this landscaped gateway between Mullen and Russell, which we envision might have considerably more plantings. The second one is a village center at Burton Street, where we think there could actually turn into a real sort of neighborhood commercial center. And finally, the downtown extension west of Orange. I know those are small and kind of hard to see, so I'm going to take you through them a little more gradually. So this is a picture we took. Yes, ma'am.
Actually, Homeward has the Liberty Lanes there, has a plan for that area.
Right. That's would be in the back of this photograph. And this is a photograph taken a couple of months ago of West Broadway between Mullen and looking toward the Russell interchange. And we thought with adding additional plantings here and some others on the left side of the road looking this way, it might change that way and be really kind of a grand green gateway into the city and give you a real sense of arrival as you come around that curve and start to move into feeling like you're really moving into central Missoula. Moving further on toward the intersection at Burton, this is also a picture we took a couple of months ago of the intersection as it is now. And then we envisioned over time, this isn't going to happen by later this year or even next year, but over time we could see some changes taking place. Those changes might start with landscaping, planting more street trees on either side of the street, putting it in appropriate places, a raised median with plantings there as well. And then as you start to work with property owners to make some deals for redevelopment, we might begin to see some buildings coming into the area that might be built up to the street and start to make it feel like a pedestrian-friendly kind of place that you felt like you wanted to be a pedestrian there. One of the things I noticed is this is probably taking place over 15 or 20 years, and this guy hasn't had his car washed the whole time. And then ultimately with the addition of more people getting some things to work, it might really feel like it was a part of Missoula and an extension of your beautiful downtown as opposed to something else. And then finally, moving right down to the downtown extension, this is taken looking west on West Broadway, just across Orange Street. Here's the St. Pat's is right there, and that nice new building that's there is here now. There's already been this visioning effort for the riverfront triangle, which would be over here on the left. We think it's important that it happen on both sides of the street, and that this is a place where I said it's really important that it feel like a place that pulls you in. So You see, if you put a building over here that's as handsome as the one that's over there, it really changes the whole character of the neighborhood. And so it's very important when this piece of property redevelops that we get that building right, that it really kind of gives you that sense it's going to have a huge impact. We also started to show some additional landscaping along the street here. Over time, some more buildings might get built further into the background. We talked about perhaps at the corner of St. Pat's, perhaps getting a small shop or something there that had a more active entrance out to the street. Further development along here on the left. And then ultimately the whole streetscape could look like that, which would be, I think, the kind of thing we're thinking of making it a place you might just walk right on out there from downtown and not feel like you had to get in your car. Are you raising your hand?
I come back to the same thing that I've said before, that I have enough trouble crossing the streets as it is, but if you put the landscaping there, it may look nice, but people can't see me crossing the streets now. They're not gonna see me with the landscaping.
Good point, and we're just coming to the transportation aspects and the key intersections, so Jeff's, I think that's coming up right now. Great segue.
You might want to cover your ears, because when I turned this on, we noticed there was quite a bit of interference, so how do we do this?
The handheld's not going to be loud enough.
I just turned it up.
Oh, okay, great.
Testing? Testing? How about now? Okay. Testing. There we go. Okay, great. Well, okay, so this is a great time for me to jump in and introduce myself. Good evening. My name is Jeff Key, and I'm a transportation planner from Helena, Montana with Robert Petch and Associates. And so some of you may have heard me speak before, and I am on tap to discuss transportation and a little bit about parking, so I'll jump right into it. First of all, at our last Charrette, we heard several overriding themes loud and clear. And it's always good to go back to what we know and what we heard and summarize that. And so this first slide shows a few things that I heard as a transportation planner, and hopefully you all remember this. First and foremost, the concept of a traditional traffic analysis may or may not be appropriate. Likely it is not appropriate. And what I mean by that is, as a traffic engineer, when we try to do traffic analysis on things like developments, for example, we point to the ITE trip rates, and we point to quite a few antiquated methodologies that we use time and time again. And I think with this vision that we're trying to achieve in the long term, that traditional analysis may not be appropriate. So there's going to have to be maybe some innovative thinking about traffic as time goes on and as this concept develops. We heard that it's not just about the corridor. Traffic and transportation is not just about this corridor. We actually heard that there's regional network implications as well. Things that might be happening west of Russell Street or in other areas of the community certainly can have an impact on this corridor, and that's a valid statement. We also discussed how difficult it is for myself as a planner coming in on a visionary Charrette project to actually pinpoint what that regional network implication is. We spoke about the transportation plan update. And your community does this very involved transportation plan update every 3 years. When we spoke at the Charrette, that process had not begun. We're here today and the process is about to begin. And so as transportation plans get updated, there's much more refinement that goes into projecting land use outside of the corridor and projecting travel modes and things like that. And then lastly, we heard loud and clear, show us potential road sections. I think that was kind of a criticism from the first night, was that, you guys are talking, but we need a visual. And we also heard, show us what, intersections might look like. And so that was kind of my charge. I think, there might have been a desire for Mr. Transportation Planner to tell the audience this needs to be a 3-lane or this needs to be a 4-lane and things like that. But I think our charge from the Charrette was to give us the options and tell us things like capacities and when we might, have to revisit things. And so that's what we've tried to do. And if you could go to the next slide, Brian. So where have we been? Right now you have a current configuration of your roadway. And it is in response to several different things, but I keep pointing to the very intense traffic study that was completed, I think back in 2002, that actually helped to arrive at this roadway section. The roadway section you have right now is a 3-lane roadway section. It has standard lane widths in accordance with Federal Highway Administration guidelines. Those lane widths are 12 feet in each travel direction. The center median is generally 14 feet consistently throughout the 3-lane section, and then you have a 5-foot bike lane. And there are variations in this typical section based on the amount of right-of-way and the curb-to-curb distance as you go up and down the corridor. So where there are discrepancies in the width of the roadway, it's really made up in that parking lane or the shoulder, whatever you want to call it. This current configuration leads to a discussion of the pros and cons. The pros of this configuration, of the existing configuration, is one, they are fairly pedestrian and bicycle friendly compared to what was out there before. The vehicle travel speeds are generally lower than what was out there before. There are shorter crossing distances at some of the major intersections, and that was a fundamental tenet of that previous study and the need for this, this roadway change. And then the other pro is that there's a potential for fewer and less severe crashes. When you start to slow speeds, obviously speed is related to the severity of crashes, and so I think a pro from this is going to be maybe a reduction in those crashes. Now, talking about the cons, the first one is there is a reduction of available gaps in the traffic stream, and we talked about that at the Charrette, that when you're taking vehicles and you're pushing them into fewer lanes, that those gaps are reduced. And I think that was that's something that's being experienced if you're out there driving, and it was also called in that initial study back in 2002, and so that is obviously a pretty significant con. Some drivers may seek out alternative travel corridors. I don't know for sure if that's happening yet or not, but the fundamental tenet of traffic engineering is that when roadways come to a certain point and the congestion is just too difficult to deal with, then the fundamental tenet is drivers will seek out alternative routes. So that's a potential con. The transition at the major intersections do seem confusing, and we talked about that at the Charrette, and predominantly we talked about Orange Street. When you're driving from the downtown, out on West Broadway to the west, that transition at Orange Street is somewhat cumbersome. If you get caught in that right-hand lane drop and you don't want to be there, you have to move over and merge. And so we see lane drops all over the place. Unfortunately, you have to do a lane drop somewhere. And so we heard loud and clear that transition is confusing. And likewise, over at the Russell Street intersection, there are issues with the conversion of the 4-lane to the 3-lane at California and Toole Street. The smart, savvy driver, the locals, they know that if they get caught in that left-hand lane, they're going to have to merge over, and it's very, very difficult, especially during rush hour. And so people are getting prepared for that by doing their queuing on the west side of Russell Street, and so you see a very uneven queue length. And that's not always a good thing either. And so again, that's the transition on the opposite side of the corridor. And then lastly, the curb-to-curb distances vary along the existing corridor due to right-of-way, and in my mind, that's not a desirable thing. I think as we go forward, we want to have a standard right-of-way, we want to have a standard curb-to-curb width, and we want to have a standard roadway section. So that's the existing scenario, and we did talk about that. So, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. And so this was an example of inconsistent right-of-way. One of the I guess, desires after our Charrette is somebody said, well, can you give us an idea where the right-of-way is less than 100 feet? And from my mind, I was thinking, well, how in the heck am I going to do that? Basically, what I did is I looked at the city's GIS system. You can actually download the GIS database. You can look at it on a scaled version, and you can actually go in there and pick right-of-way widths. And I held 100 feet as being important because these roadway typical sections that we're going to present here in a second, they're basically, the fundamental constant is that, we're working with 100 feet right away. And so part of the question is, where do we have 100 feet and where don't we? And so really what I was able to extract from the GIS software is that this section in orange over here on the right, it has right-of-way bouncing all over the map. I mean, when I actually measured right-of-way, I had 91 feet, I had 92 feet, I had 95 feet. When you get past that orange, you know, we have right-of-way that's in excess of 100 feet. The best I can tell. I mean, the only way you would truly know is to actually go out and survey the right-of-way. But that was a question that was asked after our charrette is, what is the right-of-way situation? So this is an example where there's an inconsistent right-of-way along a portion of the corridor. And I think prudent planning would suggest that as you go forward, you know, you want to make the effort to acquire a constant right-of-way width. So go ahead, Brian. Okay, so this potential section was a section that we really roughed together very quickly at the charrette, and we had a little bit of time now to kind of refine it. But this potential 4-lane section relies on a couple innovative type things regarding lane widths and moving buildings to the the street frontage. This potential 4-lane section incorporates narrow lane widths, which would be 10.5 feet in width. It incorporates a fairly narrow median of 8 feet, which, as you get to a major intersection, would actually have to widen out to provide stacking and turning, turning space for turning movements. It provides landscaping in the center median. It provides a 5-foot bike lane, which is a desirable bike lane width. I think at the initial meeting we were suggesting the minimum, and there was a little bit of comment about, that's not appropriate for community. And it does provide a varied parking width. The question about landscaping is, we would not envision landscaping to happen at the intersections where the crossings would occur. I think landscaping along a raised center median is appropriate for those areas, but when you get to the actual intersection, we don't envision landscaping that would obstruct, sight distance and things like that. So this 4-lane section is a fairly dense urban typical section. And I promised myself I wouldn't talk about urban areas in Seattle and Portland and things, but I can't help myself because I grew up in Seattle. I was in Seattle over the weekend, and as I drove around Seattle, I saw a lot of typical sections just like this, and they seem to work fairly well. Go ahead and go on. And so, obviously, with the potential 4-lane section, there are pros and cons as well. And one is that a pro is the narrow lane widths provide traffic calming and lower travel speeds, and that's a given. I mean, there's documentation that suggests that. The center median provides access control along the corridor. The intersection transitions are greatly improved with a 4-lane. With a 4-lane option, we pretty much get away from this lane drop issue that seems to be causing some concerns on the ends of the corridor. And lastly, the roadway has a higher traffic carrying capacity. And I think that's a pro. Maybe it's a con. I don't know. I had the question today in Bozeman at a meeting, do we ever design roads to discourage traffic? And it was a pretty interesting question, and there wasn't really a good answer to that. So I think the pro is that it can carry more traffic, but maybe that's a con. So on the con side, right-of-way will have to be acquired. I think I touched on that a little bit. The narrow lane widths are non-standard and must be approved by the Federal Highway Administration. Now that's a big one. That's a pretty big con. And in my discussions with the Federal Highway Administration to date is that, maybe, and the reason that the Federal Highway has jurisdiction over this facility, I believe, is one, it's on your truck route system. And I don't know if it's on your urban aid system, but I suspect it is. But my discussions with Federal Highway is that, if this is a direction that the community wants to go to, then maybe it's time to have the discussion about your truck route system and whether or not you want West Broadway to be on your truck route system. So that's the kind of balancing or the type of sensitivity that would have to happen to realize a narrow lane width. The other thing I wanted to say about narrow lane widths is that irregardless of your personal opinion on the lane widths, it is a trend that is coming to Montana, and all the communities are dealing with it right now. And so, as I said, I was in Bozeman this morning, and the discussion in Bozeman was narrow lane widths. The community is starting to go to the direction where they want narrower lane widths. And so I don't know where your community is at with narrow lane widths, but certainly that is a con. Yes, ma'am.
answered Sheila or helped Sheila with her question or not, but I think one thing you have to realize is that people who use wheelchairs are much shorter than other people, and they're harder to see, and that's where we run into the problem.
Yeah, and that's a very good point.
And so that's what you have to look at.
That's a very good point.
Don't you guys agree?
I've tried to make that point several times.
And I don't know how you can get around that. No vegetation is good, you know, no
No
landscaping, no, I don't know. You need to have automatic not stops. You need to have either a stop sign or you need to have signal lights that automatically, not one you have to push, because some people can't push them. You have to have, you know, like the one you put in, it's great that you put in a stop light, but you put in one that you have to push, and not everybody can push them, so you kind of blew that.
Okay.
But
Well, that's a good point, and we can discuss. I have some more slides about traffic signalization, but I understand what you're saying. You're talking about pre-timed stops for,
yes,
a certain user group.
yes.
So, did you have a comment?
I'll just offer that, we'll definitely put in our plan, a rule of thumb that we use for, when we run walkable community workshops, and that is, everything should be either knee-high or 10 feet tall. You either have some, your visual clearance
Yeah.
goes from knee-high, and, so you have trees that'll grow up to have the clearance,
Right.
up high here, and then, but nothing higher than knee-high.
Right.
And
Right.
we'll reinforce that in the text. I think you raise really excellent points, but you have to think about it, people who are shorter and children and people
Okay.
with impaired abilities and so on. So we'll definitely put that in.
Especially since they're building more housing there for
Yes.
condos,
For
there's gonna
kids.
be children there crossing the streets and stuff,
Yeah.
Yes,
along with the wheelchairs.
we'll definitely make sure we reinforce that language. Thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you.
Thank you. So continuing on then, other potential cons to the 4-lane is the parking is a little bit narrower. Okay, and then moving on to the 3-lane option. The 3-lane option, I would have probably called an enhanced 3-lane option because the travel lanes and the center median widths are essentially what you have right now. But the enhanced portion is the raised median, the kind of streetscaping improvements, moving the buildings up. Obviously, you saw the simulations of what could be accomplished with this, and we think that this is a very reasonable 3-lane option as well. One of the things I was asked to do was to kind of give you an ultimate capacity that I think a 3-lane and a 4-lane would handle. I'm fairly comfortable suggesting a 3-lane can handle the 20,000 vehicles per day, realizing that there are trade-offs, and the one trade-off that I think has brought many people to the table has just been the inadequacy of gaps in the travel stream. But I think as a long-range vision, if these corridor improvements were made the way we're thinking about it, we would not have accesses to the main street. We would actually encourage accesses to the back and some other things. So you can actually get out a little more capacity in the 3-lane by implementing some access control features and some other things. With the 4-lane section, I think we can get upper capacity up to 24 or 26,000 vehicles per day. So that was a question that I was specifically asked, and they, and the comment was, make sure you give us your guidance for capacity, because somewhere down the road, the community is going to have to continually revisit this capacity issue. And if you have through capacity on the corridor that's resulting from things out at Russell, when you go to a 4-lane section, that'll come into play. The other thing I did not say is that our charge was really, to come up with something that would work, whether it's 3-lane or 4-lane. I think what we're projecting here is a concept that you start with a 3-lane, leave it a 3-lane, maybe you do incremental change, but realize that someday you're probably going to have to go to the 4-lane, but you can do it within the right-of-way that you've acquired, you can do it within the buildings that have been developed, along the street frontage. And so the enhanced 3-lane section does have pros and cons as well. Higher degree of access control, safer pedestrian environment due to reduced crossing distances and center median refuges with proper design and proper sensitivity to this landscaping. A larger buffer for cyclists using the bike lanes. Proposed lane widths meet standard guidelines, federal highway guidelines, and it really changes the character of the corridor. Again, the cons would be fewer available gaps in the traffic stream. With the raised median, it really means that all the access would be at the major intersections, which are a combination of signalized and unsignalized intersections, which would have to be, implemented as time went on. Traffic may seek out alternative routes. Transition issues at the major intersections would still be present. Those transition issues are pretty big. I'll talk about them when I get onto these plan views, though. And then lastly, the right-of-way, should be acquired. Yes?
Can you go back 2 slides, please?
2 slides?
One more.
One more?
Can you talk about the last comment?
Yeah, and I neglected to say that. I say pedestrians must cross additional lanes of traffic in a longer distance. Basically what I'm getting at is that if you've got 2 through lanes on one side of the street, that pedestrian is crossing that distance, whereas with a 3-lane, they're just crossing the 1 travel lane. The way things are laid out right now is you don't have curb bulb outs and things like that that would inherently reduce that distance even further. But with the 4-lane option, you will be crossing 2 lanes of travel, and then you get to the center refuge island, and you'd have a point of refuge. So I view that as a con. It's not something that couldn't be implemented. Okay, so moving on then, the other item that we were tasked with is, go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I've also noticed, I live on Broadway in Burton, and when I go out my building sometimes, it says right, to turn right only, and I guess people can't read that drive cars, because they always try to turn left there, even with the way they have the medians and stuff. And isn't there some way that the police could start ticketing that so that we could get that done so that people would get picked up for that?
Well, it's certainly a message that we can go ahead and, push on to the appropriate party. You'd like to think they could, but, I don't have the answer to that.
Because almost every other day that he comes to do me, he has to wait for somebody that's trying to turn left.
So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to politely ask that you take some notes as we go through the presentation. And then once we get through it, which I promise we will, we'll have lots of time for questions and answers. But I'm worried that we won't get through the presentation if we don't kind of plug ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and then the last task that I was personally kind of assigned to was tell us what these intersections might look like. And I'll tell you, this is the best that I could do. I'm an engineer, I'm not one of these urban planners, but this conceptual stick figure is pretty impressive for me.
Nice colors.
Yeah, nice colors, right. But, certainly, I think the premise was, whether you have a 3-lane or a 4-lane, give us an idea of what the potential geometry would be. And I think what I've tried to do at all these major intersections that, Brian spoke about was do that. West Broadway and Orange, if it was a 4-lane roadway, it might look something like what we have on the left. I'm not saying that this is perfect, because right off the bat, the westbound right turning movement onto Orange Street is a very heavy movement. So when it's all said and done with, we may need a designated right turn lane there in the long run. But the fact is I'm always a believer of starting out simply and then moving on. And I think with traffic engineering, you can always start out simply and then you can keep building rather than just jumping to that ultimate design. So, that might be an example of a 4-lane roadway. Realize that those visualizations on the wall over there really does this a lot more justice about what could potentially happen at the intersection. With the 3-lane option, enhanced 3-lane option, we do have the struggle still about transitions. And like I said, if you're coming from downtown and if you're not familiar with how this works, you potentially get stuck in that right turn lane and you're in a position of having to merge over. And that is problematic. And I see a range of things that could be investigated, I think, starting as simply as, really aggressive signing farther down the corridor to tell people that, you're going to get stuck here if you don't start to move over. That's a very simple, low-cost type of thing, and you could do it a lot of different ways, flashing signs, whatever. It goes all the way up the spectrum to actually pushing the 3-lane farther to the east through the downtown. That's the opposite end of the spectrum. And and I'm sure somebody here will be able to answer this question when I ask it later, maybe in our workout sessions, but the original study back in 2002 actually had a 3-lane section going all the way to Madison. And they actually, called it point blank that if you don't do this, you're going to have some transition issues. And so this was pegged, and for whatever reason, this is where we're at. But there are some interim things that could happen between the low spectrum of aggressive signing to the high spectrum of pushing it through. There's some interim things that could happen about where you do the lane drop. And so with the 4-lane, I think that transition issue kind of goes away. With the 3-lane, it's still there, and it would have to be addressed in pretty good technical detail, as time goes on. We have the intersection of West Broadway in front, and this intersection pretty much is exactly the same as the Riverfront Triangle Master Plan. It was a very good layout. We have no issues with it. The 4-lane option on the left, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, basically creates this kind of one-way egress movement on Front Street. Oh, I'm sorry. You can't see the screen when I point. It has the one-way egress movement up there, and it actually kind of creates more of a kind of a hardscaped, environment, public space there with a crossing. And again, with sensitivity to landscaping and things like that, this is a very, very desirable treatment. We would envision McCormick hopefully to be a signalized intersection in the future, realizing that, to become signalized, you do have to meet at least one traffic signal warrant. And as a traffic, planner, you rely heavy on those warrants. And so certainly you can't put a traffic signal in if it doesn't meet one of the 8 warrants or more. And presumably, and so we would envision in the long term, because of the level of pedestrian activity and the level of perhaps left-turning movements out of McCormick, that this could be a good candidate for a signal. The 3-lane option, is reflected in this drawing as well. So go ahead, Brian. And then West Broadway and Burton. And of course, we view this as a very key node as well. And the simulation kind of points to that a little bit as to what we envision it looking like. Again, we have a 4-lane option and we have a 3-lane option. I have the little note on there that says, intersections should be evaluated for traffic signal control warrants as surrounding area develops. The jury would be out whether or not the traffic signal would be warranted there or not, but depending on the type of development in the area and the type of pedestrian activity, it could very well be. And so, again, this would be envisioned to be a traffic signal, realizing that this is a long-term vision. This isn't, this wouldn't happen overnight, obviously. And then the next intersection of West Broadway, California, and Toole is the one that I personally really, really struggle with. Because of the way the intersection's laid out, there's only so much that we can do with that intersection. And I think the way it's laid out is causing concerns and issues west of Russell. And so when I look at this, first and foremost, I think with a 4-lane option, there would be that transition issue would pretty much go away farther west of Russell. But with the 3-lane option, that transition issue is still going to be there. Part of me thinks, and this is kind of what I'm coming up with, part of me thinks that it might be appropriate to move the left turners at the intersection, make them make the movement to a left turn bay. Like right now, there's a two-way center turn lane. And what I see is that, those left turners have that priority. And what happens is if you get stuck in that lane, you're actually looking over your blind side to try to merge. And, I know that that's a heavy movement, but part of me is thinking that if we were to perhaps create a left turn bay with an appropriate length for the amount of vehicles that are going to have to be stacked there, Once the vehicles come through Russell Street, if we were actually to encourage them to go into a left turn bay, it might make the transition a little bit better, because now the through vehicles are actually going to be, in 2 lanes as they come through Russell Street. The problem with that is you still have to have a lane drop. You have to drop a lane somewhere if you're going to the 3-lane section. In my mind, I think it's better to do the lane drop on the right-hand side, because people who are going to merge are going to want to actually merge looking to the left, and they're much more comfortable doing that. When I got caught on the inside lane today, when I drove into town, I was on the inside lane and I needed to merge right. And it wasn't that easy. It was actually very cumbersome. So when I look at this difference between the 4-lane and the 3-lane, I think maybe a better solution to try might be to put a left turn bay in where that center 2-way is, and actually make the left turner movement actually get over into that bay and do the lane drop on the right-hand side, say at California. But again, this is long-term, and again, there's a range of things that can happen. You can do the low-cost, very aggressive signing, because when you're on the other side of Russell Street, you have no idea what's going on. When I come in from out of town, I don't know what I have to do. So you could do some very, very aggressive signing in conjunction with this grand entryway, and that would be kind of the low spectrum treatment, all the way up to a very high spectrum treatment, which is really what I just described. So that intersection has some very interesting geometrics. And then the other thing I notice at other times of the day, the through lane, if you're on the west side of California and you're going east on West Broadway, sometimes that through lane is stacked beyond belief and there isn't anybody in the adjacent left-hand turn lane. And so there are some interesting geometrics and travel patterns at that intersection. Again, the transportation plan update is where you would customarily dive into the hardcore technical analysis, and I think that should be part of this upcoming plan. And then lastly, the West Broadway and Russell intersection. As many of you know, there is an EIS project that has been going on and will continue to go on. And part of our direction has been that, the layout on the left is what's in the EIS right now. And I don't remember, but if you counted up all the lanes, there's a lot of lanes there. It's like 23 lanes. I think our charge has been, consultant team, you can't really touch that. I mean, that's the environmental impact statement, and it's based on a pretty aggressive process by federal mandates. But if you can come up with a smaller footprint, that would be a good thing. So I think what I've done is I kind of looked at it, and I still struggle a little bit, but first and foremost, there's 2 obvious things that I hope that we can do. And the first one would be, initially, I can't reach up there. Initially, that southbound right through lane and right turn lane, in the EIS, it's not shown real clearly, but it's a very sweeping right turn radius. When I looked at the traffic volume projections, that volume of those vehicles making that right really wasn't that big of a volume. Because people are bypassing that and going over on the side streets to make that right turn movement, people don't want to go through the Russell Street intersection. I mean, I don't want to go through it. You probably don't want to go through it. So my initial thought was, let's not even allow people to make a right turn movement. And if you were to do that, you can suck up that radius quite a bit, which has the benefit of reducing the crossing distance across West Broadway. With that crossing distance, that's much longer than that crossing distance. And then we had the discussion that rather than totally prohibit right turn movements, maybe you would still allow right turn movements, because certainly some vehicles are going to end up wanting to do it, but don't focus on the trucks. Let the trucks actually go, the intersection or 2 before and sign it appropriately. So that was one change that, I was thinking about that would reduce the footprint. The other one is combining the westbound through and right turn movement to North Russell, and that's up here. This scenario right here has a very wide throat width, very sweeping radius, presumably to accommodate the very, very large truck. The WB67 is what it is. It's a semi-truck. That movement as well was not a huge movement. And so part of our thoughts is maybe we can combine that and actually tighten up the radius and lessen that crossing distance. We will be tied into designing, whenever this happens, you will be tied into designing for a very large truck on this leg, on that leg, and probably on this leg unless you choose to get it off your truck route system. I am unclear as to whether you absolutely would have to do that on that leg. And so there still is a little bit of an uncertainty, but the fact of the matter is we're trying to reduce that footprint with some very small changes, and these are very small changes, and obviously there's always a balance. And that's what we've come up with this. So in conclusion, that's what I've come up with for transportation planning. I'm not telling you that you're going to the 4-lane in 6 months, but I think there's the potential, as the vision is realized along the corridor, to constantly reevaluate what those volumes are through your transportation plan. When you have a development come in on the corridor, they'll be doing a traffic impact study, and sooner or later you're going to realize a volume that's not comfortable to the community. And at that time, I think you're going to have to go to your 4-lane section. And lastly, a little bit about parking is, certainly we envision on-street parking along the corridor. Typically in a corridor like this, where we're envisioning this kind of urban density, the on-street parking is short-term in nature, it's time restricted, it's intended for folks to pop in, do their business really quick, and pop out. But the off-street parking is really where we have to really put our heads to a parking management strategy. There are a couple spectrums of off-street parking, and the first one, which we view as probably most desirable, is a situation where parking is behind the buildings, and access to that parking is through the major intersections, and it's not through individual accesses all over the corridor. This is exactly what I saw in my neighborhood in Seattle. I grew up in Ballard, and as I drove down on Market Street in Ballard, this is exactly what we have. And it works there, the narrow lane widths, the pedestrian feel, the streetscaping. And so from our perspective, this is kind of a highly desirable solution to parking management. A perhaps medium desirability would be allowing an access to the corridor directly to provide parking back there. And there are cases like that too, where I grew up. And a case that I looked at over the weekend was, this was a flower shop, and these were 2 office buildings. And the flower shop had quite a bit of parking for their business. There was an access, and then there was staggered parking back there. This would also work. The real issue with this is that we're not showing the raised median, so in essence this becomes a right in, right out. And then the last, I guess, lowest desirability would be something like this, which still strengthens the corners of the intersections. It provides these buildings, these nice urban buildings on the corners, but it also provides those buildings in the back, which I wouldn't call strip development, but this is a little bit different than kind of what we're professing. But the bottom line is that a parking management strategy would be one of the, I guess, implementation products on that colored graphic over there. Is that in the first 0 to 5 years of implementing this plan, a good parking management strategy would have to happen. A access management plan is probably in order for your corridor. Access management plans are very, very intensive in that there's a lot of one-on-one communication and looking at standards and things like that. That's an implementation strategy. And lastly, I believe that the transportation plan update that your community does on a 3-year cycle, I think it needs to continually look at these volumes and continually look at these intersections to make sure that our vision is actually technically doable as time goes on. So we'll answer questions, obviously, after our presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. I just want to close with a couple comments about implementation. We've showed you some fancy graphics of how your street could change, and I'm sure there's some thought of how would that ever actually take place. We've actually illustrated here what the plan view of the street might look like in the future if with a lot of that development happening. So there's a lot of big steps there. So the goals here would be to improve the physical environment, to leverage private investment, to reduce development risk, to encourage private investment, and to enhance economic opportunities in the corridor. Abe Farkas at the last meeting talked quite a bit about who the various players are. And you really need to engage the residents, the elected officials, the redevelopment agency, other public entities, nonprofits, private property owners, and the development community. You need them all to make this happen. Some good market indicators is that you have a growing city and a county. You have a strong downtown with a lot of jobs right adjacent to it. You have low vacancy rates, good office and retail absorption, multifamily construction is happening, and there's an emerging condominium market. So there's a lot of reasons to think that these things can happen with the appropriate incentives. Public agencies should be providing a regulatory framework, acquiring right-of-way so that you can build those sections that we were talking about where you can't now, work on the greenway, streetscape, and roadway improvements. Public-private partnerships can make some of those catalytic projects that we showed hypothetical pictures of happen, can involve storefront improvements and implementing some of the parking strategies that Jeff just talked about. And then private development will respond to those leads by filling in the gaps. You have a number of redevelopment tools available to you. We strongly encourage you to use them all, especially tax increment financing and land assembly as a way to move things forward. And that you begin a phased strategic development strategy which leverages the limited public resources that you have and balances with the realities of the market, provides a good framework, identifies key catalytic opportunity sites, and establishes public-private partnerships to move things forward. And we've laid out kind of a 4-phase strategy of some of those things, and I'm not going to go through this line by line because there'll be nobody in the room by the time I get done. But we sort of laying out in the first 0 to 2 years, you can start doing some of the more detailed planning for some of those things, identifying some of the catalytic sites, beginning to look into exactly which right-of-way you need and begin to acquire it. In the 3 to 5 year time frame, you can be assembling some land, implementing some improvement programs and parking management strategies, doing some of the public space improvements, working on the greenway. In the 6 to 10 year time frame, you can continue some of those activities, acquiring additional land, beginning to think about the ultimate design of the roadway system. And then in the maybe 11 to 20 year time frame, you can again continue with some of these activities and begin to think about whether or not you're arriving at a place where you need to make changes in the overall roadway design. So thank you for your attention. That took longer than we thought it was going to take, but thank you for your attention. What we'd like to do now is give you a chance to either ask us questions or make comments about what you've just seen, and we'll do that for a while, and then when feels like that's running out of gas, we'll break out and answer individual questions at the drawings on the wall. So, Bruce, can I get you to run around with the microphone? Yes, sir. In the green.
I think is this working? Doesn't seem to be.
It is.
It is, okay. The priority implementation matrix seems very sensible to me. I think it's practical and deals with what we've got on the ground now and starts to incrementally make changes. I do have some comments, however. I think that the parking management plan could be moved up because parking downtown is already becoming dear and will do so more in the future, and we need to encourage people to use the on-street spaces that aren't used now on West Broadway. And I think either through signage or other methods, make sure people understand how really close it is to downtown. Secondly, I'm on the transit board, and I know you have at every meeting said that transit improvements are made throughout this, but if it's not on a list, it usually doesn't get done. And it's not on that list. And I would like to see specifics like better bus stop, bus shelters, head-of-the-line privileges at intersections, whatever you're thinking about, start putting those specifically in there. Because if it's not on the list, it's not going to get done. And then one particular thing, we have a rail working group that's looking at rail, maybe to the Bitterroot, maybe only to Southgate Mall, but we're looking at using our existing rail line. And I really see no treatment on the map recognizing that there might be passenger rail traveling there sometime in the 20-year period that you're looking at. So I would hope that you would put some detail, whether it's a traffic light just for the train to get across, or development sites to work with stations or something like that, to recognize what we're doing in that regard.
Those are excellent comments. Thank you.
My question's for Jeff. You talked about the traffic capacities of a 3-lane versus a 4-lane. Do we have a good idea of what our traffic flow is right now? How many cars we're averaging?
I was hoping somebody wouldn't ask that because I don't have the exact number. I guess I'd point to, I don't know if Mike is in the room, Mike Kress or Amber.
16,000.
16,000 right now on the 3-lane section?
Yeah.
Plus or minus 16,000. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Well, I had a related question, so I thought I'd break in here, is it seems like the differential between what you gave as the traffic volume that the 3-lane would accommodate and the 4-lane would accommodate is not that great.
Yeah, it really isn't.
You know, and so I could imagine if we're at 16 now and we go on up to as high as would max out the 3-lane, which is a ways, it could easily just shoot right on through there. And what kind of thought have you given to that?
Could you clarify, shoot through there, you mean that the volumes could be? The
volumes, yeah, because it's like, you know, if the 3-lane can accommodate 22,000.
Yeah.
And the 4-lane maybe can accommodate 24, 25.
Yeah.
There's, you know, proportionally, there's not a very big difference.
Yeah, and it's very astute. Can you guys hear me without the mic? Okay. So the traditional transportation planning threshold for a 4-lane, we've always used 24,000. The traditional transportation planning for a 3-lane, we've always used 18,000. The 3 lanes that are happening now, though, and there's a lot of case studies, if you were to get on the internet and type in road diets or things like that, there's actually some cutting-edge stuff going on. We're actually seeing capacities that are approaching 20 and seeing really a maximum capacity about 22. Part of that comes into the community and how they drive. Now, I can point to 3-lane roadways in Seattle that actually carry probably 28,000, but it's a much more aggressive driving type of scenario. You know, they're just driving a little bit differently. You know, I suspect that the 4-lane, you know, and I think I showed 26,000 for the ultimate capacity. I'd have to look. But, you know, a lot of it has to do with the access control on the facility, the better level of access control, the more capacity you can get on the roadway. And a lot of it has to do with your driver characteristics. And I think the capacities I've given you are kind of a blend of what the cutting edge capacities are for the 3-lane and kind of what our traditional capacities are. Maybe we can get 28,000. But I can tell you one thing, your transportation plan right now has a capacity table for different types of improvements. And my hope is that with this road diet and the level of interest it's caused is that maybe those capacity tables will be revisited with this plan. You know, now I know I'm just talking, but I don't know if I can answer your question exactly. I mean, you're right, that differential doesn't seem that great. But, you know, those are the planning level numbers we've historically used. Historically, a 3-lane was 18. Historically, a 4-lane was 24. We're actually seeing those capacities rising now as a function of, you know, driver characteristics and access control. Access control is much more important right now than it was 50 years ago. You do not see new roadways designed with accesses, you know, all along the corridor, 3 to 4 accesses per property, and that helps elevate that capacity.
Okay, right here and then over here.
I was just going to make a comment because of the people that live in the apartments at Burton and Broadway. I think there's no question that we need a timed automatic street light there.
Okay, heard that. Over here.
I guess I have a weird question. If we're looking at maybe going back to 4 lanes in 8 or 9, 10 years, why are we even doing this now?
We're doing it now because it's been highly controversial and it needed to be addressed. And the,
Well, it doesn't make sense if you're gonna go back to the way it was, later on.
well, we're not,
To do something now.
we're actually not suggesting that it go back to the way it was ever. We're suggesting that it be a much better designed street, whether it's 3 lanes or 4 lanes.
But to make it 4 lanes and to make it so that people can travel on it, the widths you're thinking of aren't gonna work either, from what I
Okay.
can tell.
Heard that. Anybody else? Really?
Just on the 3 lanes, from what I've seen, capacities can even go upwards of 24, as long as you don't have anybody relatively coming in or out of areas except for major intersections, which is what a median would do and having the type of proposed recommended for a situation of parking. So it's got a lot of potential, and hopefully I would like to think we'd have a truck bypass or something so we don't have to worry about sky-high levels of traffic, like it seems to be pointed out that you've made a small criticism of us not really having one.
Yeah, as Jeff said, access control is key. If you have a driveway every 50 feet, it really congests the street and it doesn't move through. So if you limit that to more organized movements, you can get a lot more capacity on a smaller street.
I'm a little confused about the right-of-way acquisition. You indicated that it's less than 100 feet in the first 4 to 6 blocks on the east side. But and in the drawings, you were talking about having to acquire the full 100 feet for either way. But there was a variability in the parking. It looked like the parking was a lot narrower on the 4-lane. And I just wonder if that accounts for the fact there's a 3-lane out there right now at less than 100 feet without acquiring this new right-of-way. So is that where the play came in, the fact that you didn't mark the widths of the parking?
That's exactly where the play came in, and I struggle with that. I think prudent planning would be to acquire right-of-way for the full width. And as time goes on, if you need the 4-lane section, then you've got that right-of-way. If you're going from a clean slate, maybe you don't have 72 feet back curb to back curb, maybe you make it 74 feet, maybe you make it 78 feet. But now we're talking about things of wider lanes, getting back to the federal highway standards, and what we're seeing as a trend is the trend to the narrower lane widths. And we're also trying to create this livability, street, pedestrian-friendly type of situation. So you're right. If I understood your question right, is that variability is in that parking lot.
I guess my follow-up is it correct to say that the 4-lane plan that you put up there with the bike lanes, et cetera, couldn't be done without acquiring the right-of-way, but a 3-lane with adjusted parking lanes, like it's out there right now, could be done without acquiring right-of-way?
I think generally the answer would be yes, with the fact that there might be some exceptions.
I would say our recommendation would be, what you don't want to do if the future is somewhat unclear about what you're going to actually need, you don't want somebody to build a brand new building somewhere where if you had it widen the street, you got to tear a building down because your cost goes up exponentially and the political cost of that would be tremendous. So the point is you want to have a plan where you're trying to make sure you have flexibility for the future. I think that's our recommendation. In the places where you'd be squeezed, you want to get the government in control of enough of it that they can manage traffic in the future. Question in the back?
And if I could add on to what you're saying, Brian, is that we're also saying that we're also looking at the putting pedestrians and bicyclists at a higher priority so we don't sacrifice their space.
I just wanted to suggest on that road right-of-way that having a nice, straight, even road doesn't make a very interesting place. If you look at 93, for instance, from, it's a nice straight road from Higgins to a long way out, and it's not very interesting. So I think we need to be careful that if we're trying to make this a place, that we leave some of those interesting narrower spots, wider spots. I think all of that adds to not this desolate road look. Even planting trees and putting medians in, if you have a straight shot that you're looking down, it's not very interesting. So I just hope that we as a community want to keep it an interesting place. I mean, I do think the goal is to make it so interesting that we get some huge investment. So it's not to make a big giant road that just is straight through so everybody can rush right through town. So, or that's what I'm interested in. I won't say that's what everyone's interested in.
I like the idea of the raised median, and I think it would probably discourage pedestrians from crossing mid-block and keep people crossing at the intersections. And as you mentioned, you could keep landscaping low there for children or for wheelchair riders. What I see as a potential problem with that is the ability to take left-hand turns. And I wonder if it's possible to consider a series of roundabouts so you actually make the potential of doing a legal U-turn so that you can come back and hit that business on the other side of the street.
I have some language in the draft plan, which I understand, this is also new to you, that you haven't read it. But I have some language in the draft plan that in the event that, a traffic signal does not become warranted, that a roundabout may be a potential alternative to that type of traffic control. But I have to be honest with you. I have serious reservations about a roundabout at, say, Burton Street in such close proximity to California Tool. Roundabouts don't work very well, in my opinion, when they're so close to a signalized intersection in tandem. You either use two roundabouts or you use two traffic signals. The other thing I have a huge concern of, and I'll tell you that I was in Bozeman today because we're doing their transportation plan, and we had this very same discussion about how roundabouts are good to reduce traffic. They're good to slow down, or not reduce traffic, I'm sorry, reduce speeds, less severe crashes. I agree with all of that. But the one most outspoken group are the disabled population for roundabouts. And we had several of those folks that made some pretty convincing arguments about the difficulties that they're having with going through roundabouts. And so when I think of the best location for a roundabout, I automatically think of Burton because we're going to create something there. But for the opposite reason of the prevalence of the disabled population and some other things and the close proximity, that would have to be done very, very sensitively. But I do have some language that suggests that that might be reasonable if you go down that path of pursuing that farther.
A couple of points. One is that in the implementation plan, it's opportunity-driven, and there's kind of an organic thing, that things are going to happen with time as the political will and as the redevelopment happens. But one thing I really think it's important to note, that in this 3 to 5 year frame, we hope to have that Russell Street Broadway intersection implemented, on the ground, completed. And so that needs to be taken into account. Part of this is not just a smooth transition. There's going to be quite a node in time of a bump in traffic as the congestion at the Russell Broadway intersection is relieved, and we would expect to have a significant jump in traffic east-west on Broadway as a result of the Russell Street project. That's important to note in your plan, and it probably should be in your implementation because it's a milestone type event. A couple of right-of-way observations. The triangle site, where the 100-foot limitation is primarily from Orange to past Scott Street. A big portion of that is the triangle redevelopment, and that may come under major landowner control. That may be a portion to widen to the south as opposed to the north. That's one opportunity, perhaps, to acquire through redevelopment, substantial there. Also, as Nancy pointed out, one size might not fit all. in Missoula, so there might be some areas where less than 100 feet may be opportunity-driven, such as on the riverfront where there is no commercial businesses. There's a long stretch from the Taco John's to past Scott Street, where there's really no, or very little need for on-street parking. Therefore, a 100-foot right-of-way wouldn't be necessary there to accommodate.
I have a question about the three-lane and the, if you actually have the parking, you have the extra width, for people that are parallel parking in the downtown, for example, right now, when somebody parallel parks, all traffic in that lane stops. So on the three-lane, if right now on West Broadway, there aren't enough businesses that people would park on the street that there's any traffic flow cause or much slowdown from it. You're talking about these high volumes in 3 lanes. Is that 3 lanes with a parking? And is it, I mean, if you truly have the successful businesses with the zero lot line on the sidewalk, and they're successful, you hope to see cars parked there all the time, which also helps to slow traffic down. But in that slowing down, does it slow it down to 12,000?
Well, you're very astute. You hit it right on the head. With that 3-lane option, if you do allow that parking, you can envision driving down the roadway and stopping while somebody parallel parks. We see that all the time in the urban areas, right or wrong. That is a negative of this 3-lane section. The alternative, of course, would be to prohibit the parking, and I don't think people want to do that. That's not healthy for a vibrant area. Another alternative might be to widen that section to something bigger than the minimum parking to provide kind of some maneuvering room around there. That's also a potential as well.
Because that is I mean, it seems to me that I guess one of the questions is that the gentleman back here talked about the 4-lane, and if you only got a 3,000 vehicle per day increase, it's not a very big percentage. But if you truly have the parking, are your numbers compromised? And so if the 3-lane with the parking really is a 12,000 vehicle per day, if it's busy parking, then, and you did the 4-lane that was 24, that's a 100% increase.
Right.
I mean, so I guess what I'm asking is that, are your numbers realistic?
Well, and like I said, all I can point to is kind of the innovative research being done on road diets. And again, the road diet research that's available is a mixture of things that has parking and doesn't have parking. I'm sorry. You're right. I mean, there would be an issue with, vehicles going by, trying to park, backing up, and things like that. We do have a bike lane width, which would provide some kind of buffer between the vehicles, but it requires a higher level of sensitivity to the person parking and the bicyclist going down the lane. You're not going to remove all the conflict. You're not going to remove all the conflict. And I guess, maybe the way I approach this is do a little bit more research as to that capacity thing. And if, the research that's out there, if it's, on-street parking or not. But you're right. I mean, you picked it up. That's right.
I'd like to go back and talk a little bit more about the left turnability that it seems to be getting dropped. If you're north of West Broadway, there's really not much of a problem. If you live back there, you can go out in the side streets. If you've been visiting businesses, you can go back in the side streets if you want to turn left to go towards downtown. But now we're getting more and more residences on the south side, and they're trapped without having a way to turn left to go west, say to Russell Street, out to the western part of Broadway. You cannot turn at Burton, you cannot turn left at California, and the traffic at most times of the day is pretty intense, even in areas where we don't have blockage. So, and I haven't seen very much addressed on that, on how to turn left. At least currently you cannot turn left at California. And I know and it's already been mentioned, you cannot turn left on Burton. So
Yeah.
everybody all these planned residences, I'm not seeing an ability for people to be able to turn left onto West Broadway.
Yeah, and that's a good
Jeff-
point.
Jeff's got a left turn lane in every one of the scenarios.
Well, I think.
Okay,
I
good,
think that
because
the
right now,
solution-
there's nothing.
And the answer to your question is that for the long-term vision, we envision things like a traffic signal, which would allow you to take a left at Burton Street, a traffic signal that would allow you to take a left at McCormick Street. Again, they have to be warranted. Right now, you can't take a left at California because of the way that geometry is, and we have to provide a certain amount of green time. But with this vision, hopefully we could accommodate that. So I don't think it's accurate to say that there's no accommodations. It's a phased, long-term thing that with traffic signals or even with roundabouts, if they happen to happen, you will have that opportunity. And I understand, an interesting thing too, I keep pointing back to this 2002 traffic study that another consultant did regarding this. When I read the study, they predicted everything that's happening to a T, and they said in the study exactly that at unsignalized intersections, you will have compromised traffic flow for those left turns. At the numerous driveway approaches, you'll have somewhat compromised traffic flow. So, I think these things were expected, and maybe they, were not conveyed, but again, that's the existing thing we're talking about. I'm trying to focus on the future, and so does everybody else, but go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted a couple things. One, I think you all have done an excellent job distilling all the comments and information over time, and it's really actually gratifying to see some of these final products. The concept of the 3-lane with the parking, I think it can be handled if it's designed with sensitivity, and that the bike lane, it's not ideal to have a car taking up time in the bike lane, but I think it's part of the shared ethic that's developing in Missoula, where if the bike lane maybe is 6 feet instead of 5, and maybe it's another foot away from the parked car doors, that it can handle that parallel back-in parking person, and that means the cyclist has to know to be able to move around into the travel lane. So sometimes the cars will utilize the benefit of a bike lane, and sometimes the cyclists will utilize the benefit of the traditional motor vehicle travel lane. So I think there can be a balance that doesn't disrupt the flow too much.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about what Steve brought up at the intersection of Russell and Broadway. I think right now I can count 18 lanes in the intersection. And it's very unpleasant to cross that intersection, either way you want to go. We're talking about increasing it to 23 or 24 lanes. I couldn't remember exactly what it was. And I know that we have some island refuge in there for pedestrians. I've often had visions of skeletons on those refuges, people trying to get across the street. But I also think of that part, and I don't know if you called it a keystone or an important event when that intersection gets developed. And I think you're right, it's going to induce more traffic. And I think it's going to make it harder for pedestrians to get across that intersection. We're talking about increasing the length, even though you've decreased the footprint with your idea compared to what's in the EIS. Although I think we lost a pedestrian crossing on the south side of the intersection. Is that correct?
No.
We didn't lose that?
We took out one of the lanes.
One of the lanes.
I think what you're saying is we lost one of the lines to the crosswalk.
One of the lines, okay. So it's just that we lost the line, all right. And I've often thought of that intersection as like the beginning of this whole concept of the gateway and into the community, into the neighborhood, and into our downtown. And I'm wondering if this large intersection is really addressing that, a gateway or not. So those are my concerns. The comfort of pedestrians utilizing this intersection when we increase this size, and we know that there's going to be some increased traffic in this when it does get improved. And so I would ask for some ideas about how to maybe make this that gateway or the start of the gateway, and think about the pedestrians that want to use that, because I think there is some development in the area even now and in the future that is going to be they're going to have more pedestrians in the area. One thing that just comes to mind right off the bat is our pedestrian overpass in an intersection, and something that could be built into the intersection that actually looks like an arch or a gateway. Thanks.
Put it in the back.
In response to that, I did like your suggestions, though, at the intersection on trying to deal with the turn radii so that you could perhaps bring the corners closer together. And I really appreciate that because you were obviously looking carefully at the traffic volumes and knowing that you had some of these big trucks coming through. So, the more that you can do along that front, maybe you'll begin to deal with John's concern. Because I would be concerned about trying to do pedestrian overpasses. I think that would be a sign of failure because right now you have the chance to deal with this whole corridor and then you're going to take people off the street. I mean, I think that would be failure. And I think the other irony of this whole process is that, as you said earlier, the 3-lane was taken out from Orange to Madison. But I think what's going to happen is if this is successful, if this actually gets implemented, it'll put enormous pressure to do the same thing between Orange and Madison because this will be so much more pleasant than being a walker or shopper along Orange and Madison right now because it's so wide. And it'll seem, I think, relatively desolate compared to a tighter urban fabric like this. And I was talking with a traffic planner a couple of months ago in Redmond, Washington, where they had implemented a 3-lane along one strip, and they did exactly the same thing, and they didn't continue it on through the whole retail district. But you know what they're doing now? They're continuing it on through the whole retail district because it's been so popular in the earlier incarnation. So I think you guys did a great job.
Well, just a quick idea. I don't know if it's crazy or not, but I love the 3-lane where it exists, but it really is awkward, particularly driving west. And I think one of the reasons it's so awkward is because it's right at that really busy intersection where you have to transition. And I wondered if, as a kind of, more immediate option than extending it eastward through the whole stretch, just do it a block. So that final block is 3-lane, and then you transition to the 3-lane in the kind of relatively dense, slow trafficked area of downtown.
Are you talking about the transition, would it be between Burton and California, or are you on the other end of the corridor? On the other end of the corridor. That is one of my, I talked about the spectrums. If you read the draft plan when you all have a chance, one of the ideas is exactly what you're talking about. It's kind of a middle of the road idea between signage and the full 3-lane. Maybe there's moving the lane drop one way or the other.
Yeah, just because it's that busy intersection where it happens.
Right.
I'm just wondering if there's a website where we can get on and read the draft plan, because we're probably, not all going to get to read it tonight.
We had a mind meld. There's a handout, I don't know how many of you picked it up, in the back that has a little summary of the plan, a copy of the concept diagram, and one of those photo simulations. And right across the bottom is the website where you can make further comments if you want, and you can download a copy of the draft plan if you want to read it. So that's where you can get it immediately. I think you could probably also call Amber, and she'd get you a copy.
And I've read it, and it's absolutely spelled wrong.
The draft will be posted on the web as a PDF the Monday at the 23rd. So don't look for it until then.
Looks like we're running out of gas here. What I want to invite anybody to do that would like is to stick around, and Jeff's going to stand over here by these intersection diagrams, and Bruce is going to stand over here by the sections, and Jay's going to stand over there by the concept map. I'm going to wander around, try and look useful. And if you have any individual questions or want to make any other comments, let us know. We put newsprint up on the wall. If you want to just scribble on there, that'd be great. There's sticky notes on chairs around here with pens, so if you want to
scribble on something and stick it on one of these maps, you're welcome to. We'll stick around as long as people want to talk. Thank you for your attention this evening. I think the official part of the agenda is through. We'll be back. The next step is we're going to react to what we got tonight and do a final draft of the plan, and we present that to the city council in about a month. Do we have a date for that yet? No, date's not set, but we'll be presenting to the city council in mid-May. Thank you for your attention this evening.
Want to do anything to make it worse, because it's a bad situation now.
And I just think keeping it a closed, blocking type campus is long-term, we appreciate that.
It is, but if the academics are in this part of campus, we're going to have to get out, and walking a mile to the bus stop to pick up the shuttle bus is a solution.
So we have a transfer center there, just where you enter, and other transfer centers now within the complex are absolutely necessary, and we have good transportation, because the faculty there are going to have to go to the main campus for various reasons, and we have to make that as seamless as we can, if possible.
We talked about a bullet train down the Reeds.
We're talking about this also, this main entrance here. I don't know which of one of these heads right down to Lewis and Clark Elementary School, and there must be a load of kids from this housing. No, this isn't student housing, or married student housing, is it? No. So they're coming from over here, and they're going to Paxson instead of Lewis and Clark? Most of them are. Okay, but if we in fact started mixing up some more married student housing and things like that, then the concern about traffic and the kids that are in the neighborhood going to school here is a real concern. And so I'm not so sure that this might be the best solution to get a control light here at Patty Canyon Drive, because that's a real bad intersection.
When we were doing this, that was one of the major concerns of the community about college students be speeding down the streets by Lewis and Clark. What they found, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, particularly with this transportation hub here, we don't have that problem, because if you're here at 4 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning, see the number of students offloading and unloading from this transportation hub, it works if we have good, timely, mass transportation. And we're going to have to work that into our plan for the South Campus, irregardless of how it, shakes out.
Yeah. Yeah, some other questions?
Well, and the mountain line is going to start running more. I mean, Nancy said, I'm kidding. The mountain line's going to start running more routes down by campus as well.
Okay, that's group 4.
Here's another thing that's sort of common between all of the academic space and all of these is either here or here. It's one of those two places in every way. So, it's flip-flop, but it's one of those two.
I won't be able to work out
It's not the same thing.
I won't be able to work out whether the mountain's small.
Campus rec and athletic is the same too.
Yeah, and they're the same in that other, we said that was important in every one of the things already, campus rec.
Housing's the only one that kind of.
Housing is the variable, and then the transportation part of it, like the parking stuff varies depending upon the configuration.
It's also evident that if we build out everything that was brought up in the testimony so far, we still have like 60% of the land available still for future. Because you just look at the footprint, so if you put the parking and all that stuff in there, there's still a lot of land left for expansion for future.
Well,
that's good.
That's good, yeah. So it means at least in the short run, which is fairly long, but the short run, you're going to keep open space because of that 60% of the land, or 50 or 60%.
And that also allows you to build a lot of open space. You give it more acre within it so that it does get a feel like a
It's also like what Keith was saying, that the campus recreation, the hang gliders, the view shed and the golf, something like the golf course is all one thing. I mean, it can be one space.
Right, multi-use.
Right.
Kevin, have you got just a ballpark estimate of how big that academic area is on drawing 4 here? I mean, that big rectangle.
If the golf course is 65 acres, that's about a third of the golf course area.
Right, you better say it's 20
about 20 acres.
Yeah, 2 city blocks, 3 city blocks.
Well, as you judge it, where Lewis and Clark is right there, 7.62 acres.
I was going to say that athletic, or the oval.
Yeah, 100%. This piece right here, roughly the outline here, 7.62
7
acres.
acres there.
Yeah, so it's
Almost 8, 7.62.
So that's like 280,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Is that enough for academics?
Couple of Walmarts.
And parking.
Yeah, with parking included.
With longevity and
I do too.
But there is still that open space down below that can throw around eventually.
Yep, right.
So.
And this one, and the same thing on this one, and in this one.
And you'd have to go to some of our other drawings probably to get that, but some of that would work that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, one of the issues we had was that, as far as trying to go through my notes and pick out the square footage needs that we had heard from existing people. I had jotted some of them down. I mean, forestry, like 120,000 square feet. College technology, about 100. I didn't know about student housing, I wasn't sure on that. Juan had said, but, we thought we were up in the 300 to 500,000 square foot range.
Yeah.
Up to giddy up, especially when you start adding in, they're gonna need parking, they're gonna need access for delivery and service and support, all that stuff. So there's gonna need to be some kind of road network that gets in there.
Let me just make a comment since you wrote forestry down there specifically. The 120,000 square feet is a joint building with the Forest Service. If we come down here, we might or might not even think about that. But if we're the only mountain campus group that comes down here, we won't come.
It's
We've got to have some of the other sciences that come too, so that adds building.
That's why I was saying that didn't look like.
And one of the things that we talked about just briefly in our group was to make a
natural science, natural resources, environment campus here, and that's where the campus is for those kinds of things, is down here. So there's a theme to it, rather than having all these disparate parts. It'd be kind of funny if we were here and music was here. Have a nice for us, we could listen to nice music, but that's not going to have a lot of synergy. But if you brought geology and forestry, on all of our parts down here, and at least half of DBS, because they got all those greenhouses and things. We brought all that down here, then we've got synergy of the lands, we've got people that are working on some of the things, and you build a campus where students are focused, and I think our faculty would be far more interested in that than coming down as an isolated group, which I just don't think is really feasible. And then, the size of our building might be different. I don't know if the Forest Service would move, they like their lease up there, so we may be talking about an 80,000 square foot building instead of 120,000 for us. But then geology, if we have a neon building, that's an NSF project, hydrologic observatory building and stuff like that, we would build this complex of things that are interrelated. So that's one possibility. So I just want to make that comment because I don't want us to be put out there as isolated thing because we just won't do it. I don't think we would do it.
I don't think anybody would.
Yeah, no, it just makes sense to see that.
The word is college, which is collegiate, which is the whole social thing. And I think if you look at, if you look at some of these things, trying to pace it out, and we'll go back to the thing that Ron pointed out, this is 7, almost 8.
Yes.
So you can take that, and you can start moving it around, and and I use this one as, we just tried to figure out what a 200,000 square foot building would look like. And since we had those kind of people, that's the footprint, you can do some things, and if you can shrink them or enlarge them, but if you could put 200,000 square foot building or a couple of 80,000 square foot buildings, and you can keep moving them around with all of these shells. And there is room, and you can have that kind of synergy. And I think, when we started doing this, and I was thinking, who's my friend, who's my enemy? On this thing. Because, we're somewhere in the middle of this. Sure. And you try and figure it out, but then you realize that no matter what else, certain things are going to overtake other things. And the thing that's fascinating is how close they are. And then when you look up here, there. It's really clear. Everything that's important is, the green dots all have to do with faculty and students and the interaction of the staff. That's what a lot of our darts are telling this group, and this is a pretty diverse group.
Yeah. So could you just to handle one of yours that you talked about, Keith, could you put a little circle in the middle of Don's parking lot up there so the anglers can land, have a target?
Yeah.
Go to the cars?
Anybody in here ever landed on an aircraft carrier? It's supposedly it's like coming down on a flying skill.
Yeah.
So make it a little more ovalish. Give them something to kind of think about that way.
Because I think for the most part, most of the other designs, except for yours, sort of eliminated them, but that parking lot, you can make that oval in there.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we weren't working with any kind of square footages or ideas.
Right.
So it's very rough in terms of, it's just areas of placement, not necessarily size.
But the idea of the science complex goes to trying to make a campus, which has, has a heart, has a soul, being, and it has a character. And that was kind of the vexing question. That was our vexing question, was academics and conflict.
I could just see geology and dance.
Geology and
What about the existing college of technology? Is that something that we need to consider? What's there, or how that?
The high school district would love to have that. Yeah.
They've already expressed interest in it.
It's what Kevin, go right here.
There would be immediate use for it. They would, if we vacated it, they'd want it back the day we left, so.
The College of Technology.
Are you all vacated, I mean, considering?
Well, we share parking, and there's a lot of bad things about it, but there's a lot of great things for them, the locale, by the administration building in Central High School, and some of the code uses. And we got one of them. And the style of building it was built in the 70s, and I don't know if you've been in it, but there were no corridor walls. They were just half walls, and it's just not very functional.
It was the old Votech.
And to turn it back into something usable would be extremely expensive at this point.
Okay, anything else? Great comments. Rosie, can you give us a forecast for where we're headed after?
Well, one of the things that I want to make sure the committee's comfortable with is, my concern is that we've done some work here and we don't meet for another couple of weeks. And I'm going to start getting calls. I mean, I know I'm going to get them already first thing in the morning. And so I would like to be proactive and ahead of that and at least be able to say, at our first pass, the things that are coming up as priorities or something like that, and be able to say that. What I don't want to do is have people in the community, hear about this or see it on MCAT, and we haven't been proactive. And what I've always tried to do is be proactive. Get a hold of them and say, don't want you to hear this from somewhere else, but particularly given what's coming out of this particular session. So, but I want everybody to feel comfortable if I just talk about the things that have been identified as priorities, which appear to be, housing, rec, transportation, academics, obviously. And within all of that, athletics and open space has been very important through all that. In whatever form it takes, that's very important.
Yeah, well, I think we've identified, about 5 different commonalities among all the drawings, and they match up with the dots. So I think you can say those things.
Okay. But I just want everybody to feel comfortable, because when Greg or Dean or somebody starts to get a call and the city asks you, Mike, I just want you to be comfortable with what we, like, this is the first pass.
I probably wouldn't want to lead with the golf course is gone.
No, I don't want
But I think the important thing, and Keith hit on it really hard, is that that there's even with all the building, there's tremendous opportunities to preserve, enhance, maintain with green space, open space, sheds. There's a lot of opportunity for that in this, but
I think, quite frankly, the question's going to be, well, is the golf course going to stay?
yeah, that's going to be.
I'm going to get asked that, and I'm going to say, it appears that, from the priorities and the way everything was clustered, long-term, that's probably not.
I think you want to say that in a sentence. It's kind of like my tree statement on steam tunnels. We're removing trees, but we're planting new ones. The golf course is it's the largest area, so it's the most affected by the fact that the committee is moving toward the academic research facility as stated in the mission statement. So you can't really have all those green dots and also try to balance. I mean, we tried to phase in and the executive thing and, blah, 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 but it's the golf course, is being offset by that, but it also lets almost everything else almost remain or grow from its present state. I mean, it's hard to say unequivocally it's going to go, but it is it's the largest area, and it would benefit, the academic will benefit because it is there.
But I would think, with regard to that, your statement can be that, obviously academic facilities are right at the top of the list, but open space and view shed is very important to the committee, and they're trying to protect it. We also have put some priority on the athletic facilities,
Campus
on
recs,
housing, on campus rec. You know, it's that kind of statement that you make.
And again, I can't overstate it. Faculty-student interaction with the staff providing the lift. And then there is all of, as Perry said, we kept this open space feel. We're going to have those trailheads. We're going to enhance your access to this beloved mountain, the whole setting. We're not, except for maybe the bullet train, we're not going to go up on the mountain. We're not going to take any of that.
Bullet train,
I mean, it's and I think that's the push. And we don't know when this program and project is going to begin.
Right. I'm just telling you, when I go play, the first
No,
question
you're
I
right.
get asked, it's
We know
not,
that.
what are you thinking? Is the golf course going to be gone? That's the question I'm going to get. And I have breakfast in the
All you
morning.
have to do is tell them to call Keith.
Yeah.
I'm going to be totally honest.
And there's the great story about the Clover Bowl, and Sheila Stearns, who voted to put the Gallagher Business Building on the Clover Bowl, went home to her lovely husband, Hal. And how was your day? How was your day? Oh, fine. We decided to put the business building on the Clover Bowl, and Hal went through the ceiling.
Yeah.
You got to be old to remember where the Clover Bowl was.
The students voted against it being there.
That's what the greatest experience.
But
Fact.
didn't you see that?
That was a fact, yeah.
Yeah, they voted against it.
Oh, I know that thing, but the point is that what we have here is the interface between the academic institution.
And the students.
And they are, and we will preserve and perhaps even enhance an awful lot of what we love about that area.
Right.
Well, see, my suggestion after thinking about this and actually getting a visceral reaction to these charts is that if you tell people about what these priorities are, but we don't release these at this point in time, because people are going to pick up one of those and go nuts on them. I think we're better off just saying, those are the priorities we're going to be working on to configure the land.
Yeah.
Skateboards love your oval.
Yeah, I think so too, but I'm just going to have to say,
Because as soon as I see the diagram,
that's inevitable.
That's inevitable. That's
For the long term.
Yeah, for the long term.
Everything you talk to,
It could be like 8 years or something.
Oh, depending on funding and all those things, it could be, this is a 10 to 20-year plan. This is a long-term plan.
It's a long term.
and given funding, there's been a lot of open space for a long time.
Sure.
Okay?
Okay, thank you all, good work, it's a good start.
Yeah, I think everybody did a great job on it. What's a really tough.
So you're going to hang on to these general ideas?
Yes, we're going to save these charts and bring them back to help get the thought process. And Carol's recording the comments, I recorded them also, so we can get back into this when we start to try to hone this down a little later. And if you get a great brainstorm, be sure you write it down or something so you don't lose it. Tomorrow morning go, oh, God, I didn't think about the bullet train. Jot that down. And be sure to bring it back, because we're trying to just get all these ideas, because we got some really cool things that came out of everyone.
So what do we do?
In 2 weeks, we won't be dealing with this. You're going to have time to think a lot about this. We're going to start talking about some other things like, knowing that we're looking at something like this, we're going to talk about entrances and maybe where, things, the open space and some actual things that are part of a real master plan. And then the week after that, when we come back, Bill will be back and we'll go through our second round. Okay?
Great.
Can I ask one thing, just when we were talking about housing and things like that, and when Craig was talking about it in academic buildings, we don't have real concrete numbers, like how much space does housing take maybe, or what size complex, so.
And
that information is going to be available so that.
Well, you really can't. You almost have to just identify kind of land use zones.
Okay.
And then, because we don't know what the demands are going to be. If the housing isn't built for 10 years, the type of housing the students want then may be different than what it is today. So really in a master plan, what we're trying to do primarily, Marcia, is just identify land use zones. That's why I'm saying you can't really say forestry COT. We don't know, we just know that would be preserved for, or reserved for academic and research facility.
Okay, thank you all. You can go home and say, we were so good, we finished early, right?
No, I was, yeah.
You didn't agree, you did that. Okay, thank you all.
Thanks for your commitment too.